Hi everyone and welcome to my channel and to this time-lapse version of a little girl holding tulips in soft pastel. I hope that you enjoy this speeded up version here, and I will be releasing a really in-depth series of tutorials of this over on my Patreon channel if you'd like to learn more. So many different elements packed into one painting. But if you do enjoy this here on YouTube, then please do hit the subscribe button for my channel and check out my other playlists. So here is my line sketch on the pastel matte paper. It's the buttercup colour of pastel matte I'm working on. But before this stage, I had already done quite a lot of work, which I'll share more of in the main series of tutorials. But I had created several little small sketches, just very loose, freehand charcoal studies. And then I decided to use a grid to sketch out the main composition. The painting's going to be 16 by 12 inches, so it's a reasonably large size, and I really just used the grid here more or less to get the placement of her hands and the overall composition. Then once I transferred this sketch onto my pastel matte paper, you can see here I've made some alterations to her face to bring it a bit closer to capturing her likeness. And I've added in some working lines to, again, try to capture a bit of the form of her face and to be sure that I've got the proportions of her features correct before I start to paint. So each stage of my sketching process hopefully brings me a little bit closer to capturing their likeness. But I often find that part quite difficult because people tend to not really look like their line sketch. So without all of the shape and form and the light and shade on their face, it's quite tricky sometimes to really capture someone with the line sketch. So I really just have to trust my measurements and to hope that once I start to bring out the 3D nature of her features, that I can find her in there somewhere. So there will be a huge variety of different tutorials that come from this one painting. I, of course, will talk about skin tones a lot and about capturing all of the main features within the portrait. And then we've got a long list of other things that exist in this portrait, like the hair. I decided at this point to get a little bit of the surrounding hair around her face so that it will hopefully help me to see her skin tones a little easier. But then there's her clothing with some stripes and bright colours, the flowers sitting in front of her, and the hands, the log in the foreground. Each part of this portrait was quite challenging. So I will release a full series that breaks down each of those elements in the portrait though, if you're interested in learning more. And I'll add links in the description below and at the end of the video too, if you'd like to check out my full library of tutorials. So you can see that I'm using soft pastel sticks, a lot of unisons, a few Terry Ludwigs, and I've got a couple of extra special pinks for the tulips later. But then you'll also see pastel pencils and one of my sponge blenders. You can see the triangular shape of my blender there with the blue handle. And whilst most of the pigment that I put down is using the soft pastel sticks, there is no case where I use more pastel pencil than in a people portrait. And in this case, I really use the pencils to manipulate the pigment that's already on the paper. Sometimes I'm using the pencil to add pigment, especially the black coloured pencil, creating all of the detailed lines around the eyes. But as you'll see in the real-time version of this, I'm often just pushing the pigment around with the point of the pencil. So sometimes I'm using it to manipulate pigment that I've put down already using the bigger sticks, because you just get such a strength of colour from the big pastel sticks. So onto the shirt. I'm thinking of a portrait like this in terms of background to foreground. Anything that's tucked in behind something needs to be painted first. So I get the shirt painted so that I can finish her hair that's coming down in front of that. So each element getting worked from background to foreground. I tend to come in first of all with the soft pastel sticks to block the area in, as you can see here on the first tulip. Now the idea with the flowers was to make the edges nice and crisp, and I can use the colour of the flower, and I can also use the colour of her skin on her face behind to clean up the edges of the flower. Now when painting, I'm often talking about creating edges, and they could be really soft and fuzzy edges, or they could be really crisp, clean edges, and it makes all the difference. In this case, for the flowers, I wanted those to have really crisp, clean edges so that they would sit in front of her face, because of course I don't want the flowers to look like they're just lying on her face, like touching her face. We know that they are a good forearm of distance in front of her face, and it's the crisp edges around the flowers that really help to set them in front of her. So I'm always talking about the different types of edges that you can create in your painting, and it's those subtle little things that make all the difference. So I'm on to the first hand. I've also blocked in a little bit of the darkness on the log. Again, that's thinking in terms of background to foreground, getting those background colours in first, and then being able to apply the edges of the fingers and of the arm nice and cleanly over the top. So with my skin tones, you can see I'm bringing in some cool colours as well, and I will talk about that loads in the tutorial series. A nice mixture of tones used in this skin, and it's not always the colours that you expect to see in skin tones. I love bringing in little bits of blue and violet, and you can see how I'm using those colours to create the light and shade that's hitting her skin. So each little element coming forward in the composition. Here, finally adding the hair that comes down over her arm and the shirt. And again, using pastel pencils too. And it's especially useful with hair towards the ends, where you can flick out the end of the hair nice and finely with the tip of the pencil. So the bright blue skirt, I had some colour decisions to make in this painting, and I tried to tone down the colour of the skirt just a little bit and allow our eye to go more to the bright pink flowers and then to her face. So I didn't want the background colours to get too distracting, and I also didn't put a huge amount of detail into the skirt for the same reason, so that it wouldn't draw our eye to it. So the final big element to go in is the log in the foreground. I've still got her second hand to finish, but I decided to work on for a while, get a little bit of the log in around her arm and hand at least. And because the log is right up in the foreground and it takes over a good third of the painting here at the bottom, because of that I decided to go detailed with it. If it was a smaller amount of the log, visible at the bottom of the portrait. Maybe I could have tackled this a little more loosely, a little more suggestively, but because it takes over such a significant amount of the foreground where we're in focus, I decided to go for the detail in this case. So I did spend a long time building up the tonal values. You can see it getting gradually lighter, leaving the shadows and allowing the light sections to get gradually lighter. And although I wasn't necessarily in the mood for painting a wooden log like this, I have to say once I started it, I really got lost in all of the little details, all of the little grains in the wood. And I really liked how you get the sense of the light hitting the top surface of the wood here. And I really wanted to almost exaggerate the fact that the front of the log here closest to us dips down and out of the main sunlight. So weirdly, I really enjoyed painting the log. I really enjoyed painting each element of this piece. So many different textures to create. And I did this painting over many days, split into quite short sittings, so I didn't take too long at a time. A lot of time spent painting and a lot of time spent just looking while the camera's paused, just looking. I'll often walk past a portrait that's in progress. During the evening, when I've already stopped painting, I will revisit it several times. It's often in the moment that you come through the door and you shock yourself with the sight of it. It's often in those moments that you see what you need to fix. And so I like to split my people portraits especially over many days so that I have some time to go away from the painting and come back and make alterations. But I do hope that you've enjoyed seeing this one come together. It was quite a long portrait, many hours of painting went into this one, so that's why my time lapse is quite speedy in this one. I thought I would just give you a little bit of real time here at the end, showing how I added some final flyaway hairs using pastel pencil. So her hair does look very perfect at the top. It's mostly done with the bigger pastel sticks. But I think it can look nice and natural when you add a few little loose flyaway hairs like this at the end. So I really hope that you enjoyed this here. Please do subscribe to me here on YouTube. I do release some real-time tutorials here as well. If you have a look around on my playlists, it's not all just time-lapse videos. And if you like what you see here on YouTube, there is lots more over on my Patreon channel, where you can join a lovely community of artists who are all super supportive to each other as well. So come and check us out on Patreon. Thanks very much for watching this here. And until next time, happy pasteling.